Thank you, everybody, for being here. As always, it's a pleasure to not only host Kelley Coyner and Jason Bittner, who have been before with us, and to have you all listen to what we have to say, or these two have to say. There are many questions that actually were submitted by the audience. My name is Monica Nogueira. I'm the Director of Content Acquisition and Development here at SAE International. And as Matt said, this is the 9th Mobility Frontier. We do it every couple of months, always bringing experts who either have written or developed an SAE Edge Research Report, or somebody who has done it, and somebody else who, being an expert as well, comes and joins us to make the conversation even livelier. So today we have two very important, reasonable, creative, and courageous SMEs. I'm talking about Kelley Coyner and Jason Bittner, who have written, actually, it's going to be an 11-part series in the end when we're done with it. I mean, this is no small feat in 3 years. So how about if we start, Kelley and Jason, by you introducing yourselves and letting our audience understand the kind of work you do, your background, and what you see moving forward.
I'm Kelley Coyner, and I'm just delighted to be here. And I really think that the person who should be introducing herself is Monica, because she's really been instrumental in putting together this opportunity to think through and work through a set of issues about automation. We started this effort really at the behest of one of her colleagues, who sort of posed the question, well, what do you think when you hear someone say infrastructure doesn't matter to automation? And it was like putting, I don't know, either it was irresistible. I would say red meat, but putting chocolate in front of me. And we went from there, and Jason and I agreed to work on not just one essay on what that meant, but to look at these sets of issues. And what I would say is that things have changed. When we started the series, we were focused on infrastructure that mattered in the form of birdhouses, marking a path so that there was a way to localize. And as we move through the series, we have learned that the ramifications of infrastructure are really profound. Not so much in getting vehicles initially on the road, but in how do we move them through full deployment so we get those benefits. And then in terms of sort of what we do, Jason and I, do this on TV, as it were, but we also work together on other projects, focusing on what are the ways that you can assess the readiness of the roadway. What are the trends in looking at infrastructure and automation, something that is a really hot topic now as we look at the Department of Transportation continuing and renewing their interest in broadening it in automation. And, I'm really excited to be working also on what are the ways that we can take what we've learned and give vehicles information about what the infrastructure looks like so that they can operate better in the form of electronic navigation charts. So
we're going to need them. Yes, for sure. Jason, please.
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm delighted to be here, and I really enjoy talking about this subject. My name is Jason Bittner. I'm a principal with Applied Research Associates, which is a science and technology engineering services firm. I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. So in the colder part of the country right now, we've had our first a good dose of winter coming out of the Thanksgiving holiday here. Some of the things that I'm working on, and throughout most of my career, I didn't always work as a consultant. I was a research faculty member at the University of Wisconsin, the University of South Florida, and started working on infrastructure issues in the late 90s, primarily focused on transportation asset management and how infrastructure investment decision-making needed to be made in a more understandable format that didn't result in the mayor's road getting paved first and letting the worst first sort of principle apply for infrastructure. And then throughout my career in academia, you started to see some of the emerging issues. So we looked extensively in about 2009, 2010, into 2011 at automation being the next frontier. And certainly one of the things that has continued to surprise me as a professional is that we're still talking in a lot of ways about this being the next frontier, automation. Right around the corner. Even back in 2011, 2012, we kind of thought by 2020 we would certainly see these vehicles in place and on the highways operating. And it actually made the profession, from my wife's perspective, seem more interesting than dealing with potholes and pavement preservation that I've been dealing with most of my life, because automation, has always had a place in our cinema and our science fiction and what the future looks like. So I'm excited to be part of that. I think we do have some things to talk about that, do show progress over the past decade plus in this field. And I look forward to today's conversation about some of those items.
Yes, thank you both. And there is another person here in the studio that I would like to give a shout to. That is Sissy Martucci, who is our marketing person. Thank you, Sissy, for all the effort and the work that you put into this. Sissy will be, together with Matt, will be monitoring the comments, questions that come through you guys. So let's start. As we said, for 3 years now, you both have been writing about infrastructure and the AVs and the CAVs, the connected, the automated and connected. And the deployment of these vehicles has not been as quickly did not come as quickly as we thought they were going to be. Yet, it's going to happen. It's happening, but slowly. What does infrastructure have to do with the deployment? It's slowing down, and eventually, how will it support it to take off? Do you see that possibility right there?
I'd like to jump in first and say that
Sure.
I used to start every live conversation when we only met live and not through Zoom or another platform, with a question of why people were there. Why did they care about automated vehicles? And there was never anybody who said because they thought that it was going to be, it was a fascinating topic, although there might have been a few who were glad to talk about that instead of potholes. But what people talked about, it has been, I think, is still consistent, which is what it was that automated vehicles brought to them. And the biggest issues were accessibility, the ability to get transportation. And it could be personal, it could be parents of an adult person with on the autism spectrum who was not ever going to drive, or it could be older people who saw their time driving coming to an end. But I think that, we got caught up in the hype about the technology and forgot about what the benefits were. Infrastructure has always been an issue for the deployment of the vehicles. And what we have seen is the use cases where better aligned with the infrastructure now are the ones that are moving out, or maybe they're hitting potholes, as it were. There's a lot more movement in the use of automation of all kinds in the movement of freight. And that is because it tends to be in environments that are very controlled and very simple, and the infrastructure doesn't need to manage different kinds of vehicles being in one place. Or it's because they're operating on an interstate highway system that has better quality roads and more comfortable roads to begin with. So I think that, and I think that the sort of expectation that every driveway was going to have an automated vehicle is probably never going to be true. And so we're sort of disappointed that there hasn't been a turnover instantaneously. I think the other is that we often have to learn the lessons of history over and over again. And that is that, they were able to produce an electric vehicle that was on sale beside horse carriages in the 1890s.
Yeah.
And they sold well. They had some benefits for women drivers because you didn't have to crank them to start them. And then it didn't happen. And so, you could have been in the same situation with people predicting there were going to be electric vehicles in every place by 1920. As we had with AVs in 2020 and 2024. And the technology was proved up, but the infrastructure didn't support it.
Yeah. Jason, your take on it.
Yeah, and I think, Kelley hit the accessibility issue and the motivation to start us out. The issues of safety and productivity have always sort of been in the background as well. We've managed to kill, as a profession, another 20,000 people in the first half of this year due to preventable automobile crashes. The value of removing the driver from that scenario would be 40,000 roughly lives every year. So the safety piece is an important part, and infrastructure has made tremendous improvements in provision of safety, whether it's lane widths or safe speeds, better signage. All of the elements that we have put out there have kept that number in check, but we're still going to have a real number of folks that lose their life to automobile crashes. So the safety piece is one of those motivating factors that has always kept me interested. Frankly, I think where we've made the most progress are in some of the safety systems that are available for vehicles now, either the automated advanced driving systems that can help with safety, ADAS systems that are in place, and then the infrastructure relationship to those sensors are getting a lot better. Kelley mentioned the use cases that I think we see emerging probably as the prime candidates for increased automation.
Yeah.
And robo-taxis, kind of the movement of people in congested urban spaces where hunting for parking can take 75% of the travel time, or just congestion in general. Those are reduced when you have a fleet of automated vehicles that would be operating. So I think we'll continue to see Waymo and others making advances in that space and thinking about it from a robo-taxi perspective and the freight that Kelley mentioned already.
Absolutely, yeah. No, freight, we see it. It's yeah. So we have a new question that came through the audience right now. How much of the delay is because of the lead time in bringing any vehicle to market? And how much is because infrastructure owner operators are not providing the infrastructure that supports automation? Kelley, would you like to address it?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, because I think that figuring out why we don't have more vehicles on the road already is really important for safety in particular. I have worked on Jason's had a more academic perspective. I've been involved in the actual development of vehicles and the deployment. And my answer is that the delay in getting them to market is not about how long it takes to move through the process. And it is more about it's more about the ways in which we choose our investments, and we've got sort of some skewed priorities in the venture capital market that I think are beginning to align. So it's really a markets issue, needing to also have more transparency and confidence in the safety of the vehicles that are operating. And that does not necessarily require a new regulatory regime, but it means being open about information and being able to deal with the limitations of the vehicles. On the other side of the equation, it's not because infrastructure owners are not providing the infrastructure that supports automation. It's the need to bring the two parties together to define what is needed and when it's useful. And I think that particularly outside of the US, there has been some huge movement in that direction about that. But in the United States as well, things like we need an electric charging infrastructure to support these vehicles. And we I think are beginning to recognize that connected technologies can be very helpful in moving forward, but we are just not going to have connected technology on every single roadway in the US. So we are beginning to think about how we prioritize that, both for moving forward with automated vehicles, but what the connected component of automated vehicles is important at all levels of automation, the sort of most basic kinds of information services. So anyway, it's a great question. Thank you for letting me take a break in the action to answer it. Jason, is there anything?
Absolutely, yes. Jason, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and Kelley kind of hinted around at it a little bit. This ultimately becomes a question of consumer acceptance too, and because the markets haven't necessarily shown that people are ready to make that leap yet, into demanding these vehicles be on the road, that it's a little bit delayed in the process. And I do think that there have been some high profile issues during the testing of automation that get outsized attention. We haven't yet answered the question, how safe is safe enough?
Right.
For automation, there's an expectation that the robot has to be 100% safe, when we know that we're as human drivers not 100% safe. So those things have caused less consumer acceptance of these vehicles as well. But I 100% agree with Kelley that the infrastructure owner operators are providing a base level of product that these vehicles can operate on. And it's just a matter of bringing those two sides together to make sure that we have good thoughts on what pavement markings need to be in place, where the digital infrastructure can support advanced deployments, those kinds of issues.
Yeah, because these things have to be there. They cannot simply do not exist. So,
Yeah.
and that is
yeah.
the part that we are looking at, right? When will these basic things, what we have is not enough, is barely enough. But we need the next gen infrastructure that makes sure that the things that AVs require will always be there.
Right.
Or not.
Right. And I think that one of the really important things, and this is what, I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but what infrastructure we need to plan the infrastructure along what the deployment curve is going to be, right? And so what we need now may be lane markings, because we need them not only for fully automated vehicles, ones that operate without a driver, but we need them for people who have lane keeping and automatic braking, so that they can stay in the lane. Because what happens now with those vehicles is that the automation just cuts off when you can't read the lane marking. And I think if I were to sort of take, sort of one hot issue that needs resolution on both sides to really advance automation, it's cyber. Those cybersecurity issues, so that
and we'll talk about it later. So don't
I told you
yet.
I was going to jump around.
Okay. We have another question also submitted by the audience, which is very interesting. How does Tesla's approach differ from other light-duty vehicles and automation? How different is it, and how does this particular vehicle operate?
Yeah. So I want to bring it back to the infrastructure issue, and say that when it comes to Tesla or it comes to other automakers, whether they're robo-taxi providers or they're in the trucking space, the two sort of big use cases we talked about, they're the same. They're not relying on the infrastructure now. They're focused on how their vehicles interact with other vehicles and with people that are on the streets. But that said, there are some differences in the technology. Many of the vehicles, vehicles use sensors to take inputs from the environment, including infrastructure. Tesla does not use LiDAR, and that is a significant distinction. And then to kind of circle back again in ways that they're similar is that Tesla and every other automated vehicle developer understand that the vehicle needs to learn by being on the roadway, and maybe the questions that we need to ask are, what are the safe ways for them to do that? It's one thing to be annoyed that a vehicle's taking a long time to make a left turn. Someone described it to me as the granny turn. I resemble that remark, but at the same time, there's some ways in which we operate infrastructure. Maybe we limit certain kinds of automation to being in certain speed zones, and that high speeds are only in certain kinds of conditions. But so it's interesting. A lot of people think that Tesla is totally different. I just did a follow-up interview from a long article that was in one of the major papers, and to me, what is different is Tesla has focused on automation for individual drivers or individual owners. It's not in the technology or in the questions of infrastructure.
Right. Jason, any input on this?
I mean, I think Kelley hit all the important differentiation, of course, is that they're not using LiDAR-based sort of format for close localization. They rely on machine vision, and that does have some impacts for the, I guess, the longer term on how that might be advanced. I think a lot of the engineering decisions for Tesla on that were based on price, because LiDAR was and continues to be very expensive for long distance travel and understanding those highway movements. LiDAR is increasingly cost effective for let's say close range detection and localization.
So Kelley had a question. Do you mean optical sensors as opposed to LiDAR?
Machine learning.
Oh, machine learning. Oh, okay.
Yeah. With the my understanding of how Tesla is operating without LiDAR is through use of camera-based optical
Right.
Sort of environments, and just that it can give you the same information. It's processed in a different way rather than a data point cloud. It's using active intelligence, artificial intelligence, if you want to call it that, to determine what it sees from the optical camera-based sensors.
You're absolutely right. I think one of the most graphic ways to describe it is that a LiDAR detects an object, the vehicle reacts. It doesn't discern what the behavior is of the vehicle. It's not processed in that way. Although a lot of LiDAR inputs become part of the machine's algorithms and the like. For example, the detection of where things are in the environment. And so it's, and it's, I used to do kind of like a board game around something called the trolley problem, which was, which target would an automated vehicle decide to run over? Would it be a crowd or would it be someone tied on the ground? It comes from an old ethics issue, and the answer really is, well, what kind of sensor technology are they using? If they have the ability to process information and make decisions based on that, or are they just going to stop because something's in the middle of the road?
Right.
And so that's sort of the distinction I was looking to draw.
Yeah. Now we have, I'm sorry, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about another question that came through that's very important. How can we ensure accessible design in infrastructure in vehicle design, especially for wheelchair users? Since automation has always been, or being able to include people who have difficulty driving for whatever reason, how can we manage infrastructure and the vehicle design so these people have the same accessibility like everybody else?
Right. So Jason, can I start with a shout out and then let you give the real brainy answer, which is, well, one of the ways we ensure that is because there are advocates like Michelle Lee, who has really pushed hard for addressing these kind of things. And I have a secret source. I know that's where the question came from. So I think that it's important. There are design issues, and we've spent a lot of time on them. Jason spent a lot of time on them about how infrastructure gets people to vehicles and out of vehicles, but really we have to insist on that issue being addressed, not just in the vehicle, but also in the infrastructure. Over to you, Jason.
And I don't know that I have a lot more to add to that point, Kelley, on the insistence that it be included as part of the conversation, right? I think for much of our time, we've designed infrastructure and vehicles around a certain body type and certain accessibility and certain
Correct.
functions. So at least having the conversation and understanding that there is not 100% conformance with that body type, with that use. And frankly, as population ages too, it's good for everyone to have better options that would allow for mobility. Sidewalk ramps,
Independence, right?
curb
When we talk
heights,
about
independence.
mobility, independence, please. I mean, because we all get old, unless we kicked the bucket before, but let's assume that we will get old and will be no longer able or even willing to drive. How do we move around?
Exactly. And Kelley and I spent some time in one of our Edge reports discussing, the bus stop problem of, you have a stop that's only accessible over a curb or has no sidewalk or path connectivity or no ramp, or, there's not a zero height, a zero entry ability to access the vehicle. There's a number of infrastructure focused elements that raise this issue.
Yeah, and I would just add, this is not just about automated vehicles. The infrastructure issue is critical for all our transportation. You have to be able to get to the vehicle. So if the sidewalk doesn't exist, that's a problem. You have to be able to get in the vehicle, and you have to be able to get out of the vehicle. And that means, some of it is, being able to make use of infrastructure that's there now. You have to be able to pull up to the curb and be able to get out and get on there. But it's, it is a slow process because, like all other infrastructure issues, there are no quick fixes and it's very expensive, but we have to fix it.
Right. No, agreed. And talking about expensive investments and how we get the money to do all this, we have a question here. When you started the series, the Edge series, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act had just been passed, and the Inflation Reduction Act provided record funding in infrastructure in transportation. Now, these bills will expire in 2026. What are the most significant impacts to AVs and CAVs until we have this money and after we possibly don't? How does that work?
I'd be happy to jump in at the start.
Please.
Here. I think probably the most lasting contribution of those will be a shot in the arm for infrastructure. There's thousands and thousands of projects across the country that were sort of in great need to restore infrastructure to a state of good repair, to expand some travel lanes to provide for increased mobility and options like that. So just starting out with the basic infrastructure investment, we heard over and over again during the production of these Edge reports that one of the foundational elements that might be overlooked a lot is that the road needs to be in good condition to operate, right? So you need to have some basic level of investment in our infrastructure. And for years, I mean, we still have a lot more to do. I don't want to sort of lose sight of the fact that the road that I drive to get here is certainly in need of some improvements, and there's been a number of them over the past several years, but there's still more to be done, and just the volume and usage on those roads will continue to cause some reduction in service. So just that, starting out with that basic level of infrastructure investment, I think is key. And then really the thing that is is interesting about the shot in the arm that these pieces of legislation brought are some of the new ways of thinking. So the SMART Grants program, which is strengthening mobility and revolutionizing transportation, has funded hundreds of projects now across the country that are aimed at technology and putting some pilots in place, addressing small levels of investment with maybe some new ways of thinking. And so those programs, especially the SMART Grant, I think will be a lasting impact. And there are some others as well. And Kelley, I can turn it over to you a little bit for discussion of other programs.
I won't put anybody on the spot and ask them if they've actually read those two acts, but there is so much packed into it. And I think that the lasting impacts are found in places. One is bringing up the quality of the infrastructure considerably, but another is fostering the electric charging infrastructure and the related investments that are not just in the transportation system, but in the electric grid, in the development of batteries, of bringing things back home in terms of those investments, because electrification is integral to the success of AVs. Maybe not now, but in terms of its full-time implications. I also think that we shouldn't forget smaller efforts, and SMART Grants is one of them, but things that foster innovation. And one of the ones that I would point to that has the potential for having a real lasting impact is something that is called ARPA-I, which is a collaborative between government and industry to create solutions that support the use of AI, not only in this context, but in other areas. And they really focus on the infrastructure side. Their first big project was on intersection safety and how can these automated technologies improve that. The challenge is that we're not done. And if we look to Western North Carolina and the impact that Hurricane Helene had there, I tell people, think about the Key Bridge failure to an exponential level. And we have to, what it means is that we have to continue to invest in resilient infrastructure, and we have to help states and the federal government figure out how they're going to fund infrastructure. And there are provisions in those bills that look at new ways to fund the trust fund. And I think those are big issues in terms of advancing all the emerging technologies.
Yes. We just got another two-part question, and very, very interesting. What are the immediate needs to resolve edge cases, be it work zones or different interpretations of the same driving laws between AVs and human drivers? Also, relatedly, what is the best way to foster public-private sector collaboration on these edge cases in an environment of tepid market demand?
Well, tough questions.
Jason, would you like to start?
You want to talk about work zones?
I could start with work zones, certainly. I mean, the SMART Grants program that I mentioned, several of the awardees are looking at ways to improve the work zone data exchange so that information is more accurate. And that's, I think the answer to this question that I'm going to start with is that collaboration between the public sector, the infrastructure owner operators, and the private sector developers, either they be the app developers or the equipment manufacturers who are providing the vehicles, all rely on having good information available. So the work zone data exchange will allow for better information, more updated information, which is beneficial not only to vehicle automation, but users of the system right now that are maybe thinking about how long it's going to take to get between 2 points. If better work zone information is available, that benefits the freight industry, that benefits mobility, it benefits automation. So those are going to be the ways that we can improve that. So the better information approach, I think, is the solution for work zone. Now there are some technology applications as well that can broadcast information to vehicles to support understanding where a lane drop might be or where workers might be in that work zone. So there are some sort of technologies that are available for the actual operations of the work zone, but also this better exchange of information where those work zones are and how they're moving from day to day, I think will be very valuable.
I think that the question about interpreting driving laws can be nicely applied to work zones, because work zones have two things in common between human drivers and automated drivers. The first is, or actually two things in common and one thing not. The one thing that is not is that human drivers don't slow down when they're in work zones, and AVs do. So that is definitely, my question is, how do we get human drivers to adhere to the same law that the AV is adhering to? The second one is that both of them are challenged in how they respond to the absolute letter of the law in that environment versus what they actually need to do to drive safely. And I think that is one of the hardest issues in terms of when we say, well, an AV needs to follow the law just like a human driver does. Both of them in reality don't. They don't go so slow that they'll get run over by speedsters, for example, and that kind of issue. And I think that the edge cases question, what we've tried to focus on are areas that we feel like are most important, which are not typically, I think what I would say is that rather than fostering it's not investment in edge case solutions, but it's more, how do you get people to agree on common issues that they could collaborate on in the infrastructure context, and work zones ought to be case number one. Everybody knows.
Right. Absolutely agree. Right. Yes. Now, I have one comment that goes hand in hand with the next question. And the next question is, how do we push for more mass transit, 10 to 20 people, vehicles versus 1 to 2 people vehicles, as our streets cannot handle the vehicle volume if the scale being proposed is achieved? What aspects should be improved and or the elements that should be introduced in urban streets to enable autonomous driving? For example, in many cities, the road signs are not congruent, not well visible, poorly maintained. Can this all influence autonomous driving? And then comes a comment from Dan Jaffe. It's more than current street space. We need better cycle and pedestrian paths within the cities and suburbs to be the carrot to get people out of their cars and develop more mass transit with smaller bus services. Can you both comment on this? I think they are talking about not necessarily same things, but similar things. And there is a There is an interface there, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, let me give three quick things. One is that we agree that there's a need to focus on the mass transit and ways to make it work better. I think the second is that I think we have found in the course of our research that signage is not the most important thing. There are things that would make it better and work better for AVs, but that what would probably be more important in the urban environment is the management of the curbside and how we use that, how we keep people who are on their feet from being run over, how do we protect bicyclists, how do we make it not a vehicle-centric environment. And that is critical for the success of all transportation in the urban environment, but particularly for bicyclists and pedestrians.
Right. Yes. Jason.
And I think there is a question that, I continue to be intrigued by dynamic lane usage. During certain parts of the day, it could be a freight delivery zone, it could be parking, it could be priced appropriately to encourage different uses. And one of the challenges that I think infrastructure owner operators continue to face are things like seasonal changes in preferred travel modes. A wide bicycle lane might make sense in a college urban environment in the summertime, but come November, that infrastructure dedicated space is way underutilized just because the trips aren't there or at different times of day. So I think that one of the challenges, and even going to the transit utilization, there's some experimentation happening right now, and we'll see how it goes. It goes back to that consumer acceptance. Will people use new BRT systems? Are they willing to give up door-to-door operations to join 10 or a dozen of their fellow citizens on a trip? And those changes, those experimentation, the service levels, those are all going to be key elements of this. What are they willing to pay to have that as an option?
Right.
There are some challenges, but I think some of the infrastructure focus on dynamic lane usage and not necessarily always devoting it to the same use is probably an answer.
Yeah. Do you think if more cooperation is needed between Google, Microsoft, Apple, and vehicle manufacturers and authorities? For example, Google has immense amount of Street View data, a strong cooperation for helping solve infrastructure problems in more efficient ways. Also, could they help the end users in how they use the infrastructure and they interact with automated vehicle in a safe manner? What do you guys think?
So, thanks for helping us sort of shape this question. I think that the data that's available in these different situations are really vital to how we manage transportation, whether it's automated or digital. But I don't think that they're the answer to figuring out what infrastructure, particularly physical infrastructure, is needed. But I think it really highlights where I would like to see leadership from those types of organizations, along with the IOOs and with the developers of automated vehicles, is how do we gain people's confidence? How do we get ADS developers confident in using this infrastructure? And it's really through cyber. And Jason in one of the other hats that he wears with his ARA hat, has spent a lot of time thinking about this that in a way that's relevant to applications in the commercial and in the defense sector. What are the, Jason, I sort of wonder if you might talk to us a little bit about the ways in which collaboration around these issues ought to be focused for cyber, in terms of vehicle design and the infrastructure and the policies and the things that were in the cyber report.
Yeah, and there are a number of issues and frankly unresolved questions on cyber. We can start with having a vehicle being completely disconnected from any sources of information would be one way to protect that vehicle, right? So, no cell phone, no internet, no cameras, no over-the-air updates, no any connectivity at all would likely eliminate a number of vectors. But we know that that's not going to gain consumer acceptance, right? Nor does it improve the efficiency, nor does it have any of the benefits that we would have from vehicle-to-vehicle communications or vehicle-to-infrastructure communications that could improve efficiency and accessibility and reduce congestion and improve safety. So we have to start with this idea that we are going to have some communications and data flow to that vehicle that we need to protect, right? So you start thinking about, well, okay, how does that data get manipulated? How do you prove identity? How do you have a system that is strengthened to disallow bad actors from getting engaged and involved in it, right? So those zero trust sort of architecture situations where you constantly have to have authentication in place, but even those are not 100% reliable. So we're continuing to try and identify ways that ensure the public trust and build confidence that these systems are going to be safe. And then frankly, we have to design a system that prevents the user from circumventing that or turning off those authentications or following the phishing email and giving all of their bank information. Those
Yeah, there is that, right?
So you have to
because it does happen, which is very similar to what we see in our everyday lives, right? But now it's not only us with our phones or computers, laptops, or whatever, but us on top of that, dealing with our cars and the infrastructure, the other cars, and everything else in between. So this has been such an interesting conversation. We are at 5 from our final time. Give me your thoughts, please. Tell us where we are today. What do you think happening in the next 2 to 3 years? Things that are important for us to always consider.
And maybe I'll let Kelley have the final word, so I'll start. But I think what's really going to be interesting in the next 2 to 5 years are how much we can learn from outside of the U.S. and apply it here, because there is a lot of interesting work being done not only in Europe but in Asia.
Yes, a lot
around these questions, and there's some large scale pilot activities that we're going to be able to learn from, and there are new approaches to maybe some emerging technologies, new adoption strategies, some real life data will emerge from some of the robotaxi deployments or other uses of that. The other issue that we had potentially been able to talk about during this are vertical takeoff and landing, electrified vertical takeoff and landing kind of perspective, the eVTOLs. And that the next few years, I'm probably saying more like 10, if FAA certification does follow through and we have more
Yes.
adopted, that could be a game changer in some urban environments as well.
Yes.
Those two things.
It's taking a long time, and it will take longer than, regular AVs, but eventually we'll see a lot of connections between eVTOLs, cars, flying cars, but that's another mobility frontier. Kelley, please, final thoughts.
So three things. One, the eVTOLs will not proliferate as an autonomous vehicle unless there's infrastructure to support it.
Yes.
Period. The second is I wanted to preview something that's not in the next 5 years, but in the next maybe, hopefully not 5 months, but a few months, which is our focus on dedicated lanes. And that intersects nicely with what Jason mentioned, which is dedicated lanes, meaning ones that are dedicated to automated use, are a thing of the present in other countries. They are moving in that direction.
Yeah.
We see it in Japan. We see it in the overnight usage of proposed in Australia. We see it in bus lanes in Europe and in Korea. We over a much longer horizon, we need to be aligning that with market penetration. We don't need it to be able to test and trial these issues, but when we get to a significant number of vehicles, there's a lot of research that indicates that we should be in dedicated lanes. And then the last piece is that stay tuned to work that SAE is doing to align its guidance, its standards with the usage of the vehicles and the infrastructure that's appropriate for it, which is, there's a kind of almost a theoretical framework right now that's built around automation levels. And this really breaks new ground in thinking about, so if the use case is that truck, or it is that robo-taxi, or it is that delivery vehicle, what do we need to do about infrastructure, digital and physical, in that environment? And I think that is really, truly exciting. And that fits in the next 5 months category. So.
Yeah. Let's hope. Fingers crossed. Thank you all so much.